Have you ever wondered what it really takes to make Agile work? Well, at the Global Agile Summit, we're bringing you real-life, first-person stories of Agile succeeding out there in the real world that will inspire you to take action. Whether you're a leader, a product innovator, a developer, you'll hear practical insights from those who've done it. They'll be telling their own stories from the stage. I'll tell you more about this at the end of this episode, so stay back and listen to the full detailed description of what we have in store for you at the Global Agile Summit. But if you can't wait, you can go right now to globalagilesummit.com and check out our full schedule. For now, on to the episode, but I'll see you at the end of this episode with more details on the Global Agile Summit. Talk to you soon. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special bonus episode. We have with us two guests. First, Maria Arpa, who will be talking to us about her own work with nonviolent communication and tools that she herself has developed over the years related to the topic of nonviolent communication. And Maria, welcome to the show.
Hello, how amazing to be back with you. It was such a good conversation last time, so thank you.
Absolutely. It was definitely a pleasure, and we're happy to have you back. And joining me for this interview is also an old friend. I haven't talked with Bob for a long time. Bob is an NVC advocate and practitioner, and also publishes an NVC related, well, not just NVC, but he publishes a lot about NVC in his blog. The link is in the show notes. Welcome, Bob.
Hi there. Happy to be talking with you again after such a long time.
Absolutely. So, Maria, let's do the intro bit to start us off. I would love to start by asking you, how would you like to introduce yourself and the work that you do to our audience in the context of this conversation?
Oh, that's really difficult because, every time I start to write down, a title, and a facilitator, a mediator, a trainer, and recently I had some business cards printed and I started writing these things. I thought, this is terrible. This sounds really awful. So in the end, I just wrote my name, and underneath I wrote, walking towards conflict with love.
Oh, wow. That's such an amazing byline. Also very much in context of the conversation we're having today. So definitely looking forward to explore that phrase with you in this episode. How about you, Bob? How would you introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, I'm a bit more prosaic these days. I just simply describe myself as an organizational psychotherapist.
And when we were prepping, you talked about the concept of shared consciousness. Was that the term you used?
Yeah, I said collective consciousness or collective psyche. I work with the collective psyche of organizations.
That's such a wonderful concept when you think about it in the context of nonviolent communication. I'm sure we will explore that because in this episode, we're exploring NVC, so nonviolent communication. That's the term we will probably be using a lot, NVC, and its applications. So, Maria, let's start with you. For the listeners who might be new to nonviolent communication, what is NVC really about, and why does it matter?
So let's start by saying that NVC, nonviolent communication, is a communications tool, a practice. So it has a practical application and a spiritual application in communicating, being in community with ourselves and others. And it is the work of Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. And Marshall Rosenberg studied under Carl Rogers, who is the author or designer of the person-centered therapy model. And what I believe is that Marshall understood the paradigm shift that we need to make that takes us to a different realm that's very hard for us when all we know is the mainstream and what I call domination culture way of system of being in the world.
Can you open that up a little bit more? Like, what do you mean by domination culture, and why do you think it is in contrast with NVC?
So one way or another, I mean, clearly you could talk to lots of conspiracy theorists who would say it's deliberate, and then you know other people would say it's just come about. But there is a mainstream way that we are together in the West mostly, but all over the world, I see examples of it, that's based on hierarchy, punishment, order, and obedience to rules. I mean, there's lots more I could say. And on a continuum of domination culture, at one end, when we look at the real kind of what's the words I'm looking for, the outcomes of domination culture, you'll end up with a few people who become very rich and have a lot of power, and a lot of people who become powerless. And at the worst end of it, we can see the devastation of slavery and colonization. And then as you go along that continuum, even the most privileged people can be punished by domination culture, because at any time they could be excluded or cancelled or vilified. So we're all wounded from domination culture. It's just the degree to which our privilege or the things that we're exposed to can create cushions.
And so one of the things that is really interesting about the nonviolent communication, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert, right? I'm a student and let's call it a beginner practitioner, even though I have started many years ago. I think there's still a lot to learn. When you think about nonviolent communication, what is that perspective that it offers that helps us to first understand that there is this domination culture, and then second, to actually step out of it in a way that becomes productive, and you know, let's contextualize this, becomes productive in our day-to-day interactions with the people that we interact with, right? Let's focus on that type of context for now.
Yeah, so within a domination culture society, often the things that we're doing around mental health, around our education systems, are all designed to help people to be compliant, to become nice, dead people, doing what they're told, managing their behaviour so as to avoid shame, humiliation, or punishment. And often the motivation within a domination culture system is fear, guilt, or shame is what motivates us to behave. In a non-violent communication system, which non-violent communication is a tool, right, that comes from the philosophy of non-violence. So the starting point is a different philosophy. And what that says, I mean, there are some really easy ways. Never give your power away to another human being to tell you whether you are a good or bad person. You know, that's a number one thing. Secondly, that we want people to be independent, rational thinkers, able to internally motivate themselves to make choices from our own internal inner compass, in which we believe that all people have the potential to manifest love.
So I'm sure that okay. So I should introduce that. Bob, you talked about this collective consciousness, and you call yourself an organizational psychotherapist.
That's correct. Yes, that's what I say.
So I'm sure you have a perspective on what Maria just shared, specifically on this contrast, if we could call it, from the philosophy behind nonviolent communication and the domination culture that, as Maria calls it. How do you see it in your work?
Yes, well, even though NVC has lots of applications outside the world of work, particularly, in relationships within the family and friends and local communities. I major in my use of NVC in the workplace and in the conversations I have with people in offices, or not so much in offices these days, but in any case. I guess the domination culture that Maria was talking about is exemplified by command and control, which is the manifestation of theory X, which is people have to be beaten with sticks to get any work out of them.
Should I call emergency services?
Whereas NVC is much more theory Y friendly, which is people work because they enjoy working.
So what you're trying to relate, if I understand you correctly, is that there's two contrasting perspectives that are similar to what Maria just described, but you see them at work. You use the theory X and theory Y. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. But specifically in your practice of NVC, how have you seen that as a practical tool for you within the context of work? And then we can explore that, because I think Maria also has some great contribution to bring us about how this can be applied at work. But in your work, Bob, how do you see that being helpful in the work that you do with this collective consciousness that are organizations?
Well, it kind of stretches again across the spectrum. One end of the spectrum being NVC is a great tool for helping people relate to each other better, particularly in the context of the group discussions that we have in organizational psychotherapy. I try and model, as any therapist would, interactions based on NVC, amongst other things. Rogers is also a hero of mine. And on a more theoretical basis, I'd be very interested actually to hear what Maria has to say about NVC and the role of needs in NVC, because one of the kind of core focus of my work with an organization, whichever organization might be at the time, is to help them understand what they need as an organization and where they're at with getting those needs met. Most of the time, they're very unaware of what they need collectively, and so I help them express themselves and come to understand what their needs are, and then that's kind of a starting place to kick off the therapy in more general sense.
Maria, what are your thoughts on this concept of applying NVC and NVC's ideas, not only in a conversation or relationship, but also towards organizations as collective entities, as Bob calls it?
Yeah, thank you. So sort of picking up on Bob's talk about needs, so one part of Marshall's model is the use of needs-based theory. Now, Marshall Rosenberg is not the owner of needs-based theory. I mean, you could do a degree on it. You could write a thesis on needs-based theory, and people may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or Manfred Max Neef, who was the Chilean economist. There are lots of people who've referred to needs-based theory and manipulated it to fit whatever they're doing. But in NVC, Marshall's proposition is that we have universal needs. So at the very basic level, the need for air, the need for food, rest, very basic physical needs, moving up to things like creativity, adventure, stimulation, variety, wholeness, and then other needs around sort of community needs like recognition and community and communication and honesty and fairness and equality. So there are an abundance of needs, and what we try to distinguish is the need and the strategy I'm using to meet the need. And so, as a really simple example, you have a need for air, I have a need for air, Bob, you have a need for air, we all have a need for air, and we only have one strategy to breathe. Breathing is the only strategy that we have. So we don't have many arguments over breathing. Think, how many arguments do you have in a week over breathing? Very few, none.
Except you have a teenager who complains about you breathing too loudly, but that's perhaps another conversation.
But that's still not about the strategy. They're not denying you the strategy to breathe. That's nuanced. However, if I take a need for fairness or respect, how many ways are there to meet that need? And what if you believe you're meeting your need for fairness using whatever strategy you're using, and I believe that is impacting on my need for respect? We have a collision in strategies. And so the only argument we can ever be having is over strategies. And once I've understood that at a heart level, at an empathic level, at a soul level, it makes navigation of how we want to move forward much easier, because we understand the key principles of what we're arguing over. I'm never going to tell you that you should not have your need for respect met or your need for fairness, because I too have that need. And that's how we can empathise with each other. But we can have really high quality conversations about the strategies we're choosing and how that might impact on other needs for yourself and the people around you.
So when you mentioned this differentiation of the need from the strategy, I immediately relate that to if we don't agree on the goal, so in this case that would be the need, all we can do is argue about the strategy on how to reach that goal, because we're kind of stuck in the details, the mechanics of applying certain things to get to what we ultimately want to reach. So if I understand you correctly, one of the things you're asking us to consider when, for example, there's either a latent or obvious conflict in a meeting would be to take a pause perhaps and try to understand what are we trying to achieve and relate only what we are trying to achieve, not the strategy. And maybe through that we can elicit empathy, and then maybe the other person can do the same. And then we can then start talking productively about what might be different possible strategies to get that achieved, right? Is that perhaps one way to tackle this?
Yes, that's one way, definitely one way to tackle it is don't try to strategize until you understand all the needs on the table and that we can have empathy for each other's needs. Because if you look at, if I go into organizations, the needs for someone who is, on the factory floor are going to be very different from the needs of someone sort of further up the food chain in the organisation, or even across that. Some people are going to work and the way they lead their life, or their unhealed wounds or their traumas or whatever it is, means that they constantly live in survival mode, even when they have more than they need. So they're coming to work to meet needs for, to pay the mortgage, for security and safety and putting food on the table. And that's very different to somebody who comes to work to meet needs for accomplishment and recognition and variety and stimulation. And so we have to be able to see each other in this way, because the kinds of conversations we're going to have are going to differ. I'm going to see the world very differently to you. Different things are at stake for me.
So I'm curious about, of course, you've studied a lot of these topics, not just NVC, but many other topics related to psychology. You've created your own dialogue roadmap, which we link in the show notes. But I'm interested in your origin story, Maria. How did you come to know about NVC? How did you come to meet Marshall Rosenberg? What attracted you as a person to this way of seeing the world?
So, I mean, it's a very interesting and sort of almost amusing story looking back at it, because my son was at primary school. I was busy running my advertising agency. You know, I had big high heels and a big brick mobile phone and a handbag, you know, and I was stomping around the place. You know, having escaped poverty, of course. And I used to go stand in the playground to pick my son up from school, and there was the father of my son's friend, and he would talk to me about stuff that, you know, was completely over completely over my head. And to be honest, I was just humouring the conversation. And then one day he said, "Oh, and this person I've been telling you about is coming to London, and, you know, you really ought to come and see him, and you can buy a ticket." And I arrogantly bought a ticket with no intention of ever going. And somehow on the morning of the event, I don't know what it was, but I just went. It was a one-day Marshall Rosenberg in East London, giving a talk. And I was completely and utterly captivated by, you know, I've always been out there. I've always challenged the system in ways. I've always got myself in trouble. You know, I've always had lots of shame around being sort of a big mouth, you know, and suddenly this man in a day answered all the questions that I'd never been able to get answered through therapy, through, you know, other volunteering work that I was doing, through the qualifications I got in counselling. None of those questions were ever answered. And suddenly this man asked questions. Anyway, I came home and I grabbed my children and I sat them down and I said, my parenting's been all wrong. You know, they're like 7 or, you know, 6 and 8 or something like that. My parenting's been all wrong, and I've just, you know, seen the light, and, you know, and all the rest of it. And they looked at me as if I was completely mental. And I said, you know, I'm never going to like tell you off again, and I just completely got this wrong. And and then it took me about 5 years from that moment to really integrate this stuff. And then in 2005, Marshall was running what he called the special session. And this was for people interested in social change who either had roles in which they had influence or were already involved in social change, to come out to Switzerland for 15 days and live the process. And we had 22 people, no, sorry, we had 50-something people from 22 countries gather in a mountain lodge in Switzerland with only a cable car from us to the village that ended at 4 p.m. And there we were, stuck together for 15 days living this process. And to say it was revolutionary for me was, you know, would be an understatement. I went in 15 days from rejecting, resisting, you know, desperate to want this stuff, every being in my body not wanting to be here, couldn't do that level of intimacy with people, and in 15 days out the other side, understanding that this was it. So I asked Marshall Rosenberg a question. I said, who are the people that are going to take this forward? Like, you know, he was already in his 70s then, or approaching 70. So who's going to take this forward? And he said, the people that are going to take this forward will have the right balance of compassionate understanding and political savvy. And I just went, that's me. I've got that. And what I see in the world of NVC is buckets and buckets of compassionate understanding and perhaps a lack of political savvy. And that's a bit of a generalisation, because I can point you to people who really get this in the world and are doing marvellous things, and who I've learned from. But that was the big thing. So then I decided I was taking this forward, and then in 2007 I ran a conference to which we invited Marshall, and we hosted concentration camp survivors and a business that had bought the site of the former concentration camp, and we invited them into dialogue. And at the same time, I think I might have mentioned this, I was doing the gang work in my local area and working with lots of violent crime. And it was only after I did that, around 2010, I started to see the usefulness of what I was doing, and started to see where Marshall's work and my own theories were sort of diverging, if you like.
Mm-hmm. I mean, first of all, amazing story, both in terms of the funny twist, but also the depth and the impact that it had on you, and of course also the people around you. And in our little corner, I don't know how Bob sees this, so he will say it himself in a second. But in our little corner of the business world, the stakes are not that high, right? We're not talking about people wanting to murder each other, maybe only metaphorically and through email.
I was going to say,
but only through email, nothing else, or maybe Twitter for some people. But I do see the importance of understanding the perspective change, which is that, okay, we're not here to try to create what I would call a power struggle set of rules, right? Because we end up creating that. And I have to mention an episode we have with Michel Foucault in our archive, where we dissect, if you will, Michel Poc, where we dissect Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish book, which is a great example of that domination culture that you talk about. And what I see from what you just shared is another example of how this perspective can help us step back from that. You call it domination culture. I would call it this power struggle way of relating, right? Like, if I win, you lose. If you win, I lose type of mentality. But how about you, Bob? What are your thoughts on this?
My motivation, at least, for, well, almost my entire career, I guess, has been to help people have a more pleasant, joyful life at work. We all spend, well, at least those of us who have jobs, spend 8 or 9 hours a day, 5 days a week, in a work context. And most people who have that experience have a dismal experience. They don't enjoy themselves at all, or hardly at all. And very early in my career, I saw that was the case in a number of companies that I was working with. And it upset me. It made me feel that we could all, as a human being, as a species, we could all be doing so much better. And so that's been my motivation ever since. And NVC fits nicely, dovetails nicely into that ambition.
But one of the things that I'm curious, Bob, and I know you've written and talked about that before, but give us kind of the skinny on this. This idea of applying NVC to the collective entity, right? Because an organization is a collective entity. I mean, any organization that has more than 2 people is already a collective entity, right? So how do you see that NVC in that context of applying those ideas, those concepts, when let's say the other actor in the work that you're doing isn't one person or a group of individuals, but it's actually a group of individuals plus what they are together, right? A team or a department or an organization.
Well, the kind of principles, the philosophy of NVC runs through many threads. Just one example, perhaps, is Maria mentioned it a little bit earlier: fear, obligation, guilt, and shame. These are the 4 levers, the 4 horsemen of the work apocalypse. And most organizations run themselves using fear, obligation, guilt, and shame to get people to do things. That metaphorical stick that I mentioned earlier, the Theory X stick. So NVC, in my conversations with the collective entity that is an organization, cautions me not to use those tools to get them to do things. You'll see a typical consultant using some variation of fear, obligation, guilt, and shame to get their clients to adopt new behaviors, particularly those behaviors recommended by their consultant. I don't do that anymore. I used to do that like 20 or 30 years ago. That was when I actually was a consultant and wore a consulting hat. Just an example of how you could use fear. It's like, well, if you don't do this, and coming closer to home, if you don't adopt Agile, you will be much less profitable. People in your peer group will look at you as an idiot, and other forms of fear to get. In those days, it was individuals, but in these days, it's more not using fear to motivate organizations to change.
Absolutely. And Maria, you've started developing your own thoughts and ideas, as you pointed out in the what you just said a minute ago, beyond what NVC was as you understood it at the time, and you developed what you call, I think, the dialogue roadmap, correct? So can you talk about what you saw was either being misunderstood or missing in the way NVC was being applied that you felt the need to kind of express through the dialogue roadmap?
Yeah, so I think there were two things for me. And the most simple one is that if you worked with Marshall Rosenberg, if you watched him demoing or doing the work, one of the things he would say is, tell me what the problem is in 40 words or less. And I found that rather restrictive. So because I think there isn't a culture in the world that doesn't have traditions in storytelling. And so people need to be able to tell their stories. And it might take more than 40 words. It might take several minutes. It might take longer than that. But if you don't let people empty out, as long as it takes them to empty out, they're suppressing. And if they're suppressing, it's going to leak out somewhere. So that's the first thing, is always making sure that there's been what I call an emptying out process for someone, that they have literally reached the end of everything that they're carrying, and been able to put words to it. It doesn't have to make sense, because what I do is I help people make sense out of their nonsense, but they need to be able to get it all out. But the second thing that I've found difficult is when Marshall created the model, my understanding is that he didn't create a model of observation, feeling, need, request, and that we would speak like that. That was supposed to be the internal model that would help us to get out of the domination culture habits, the power struggles, the language of power and control, or command and control. We need a way to practice something that gets us out of that. So, for example, when I first discovered the needs-based theory, I pretty much glued a needs sheet to me, and every time I was having the usual thoughts, who's to blame, I'm to blame, they're to blame, who's wrong, and all the rest of it, I would literally force myself to look at the needs sheet and try to convert that thinking into needs. And then, I'm also a Reiki master, so I also work with energy, and then try to get the energy of the needs into my cells, every cell in my body, because don't forget, your body is a community of cells. So that I can actually model something, like physically model something. And so the dialogue roadmap was people need to be able to talk to each other, and we need to understand the pattern of a conversation and get out of the debate model. And so the dialogue roadmap is a way of getting out of the debate model into dialogue with a sort of how-to. And so the NVC is like part of the engine behind it.
I want to kind of probe a little bit more, because you made a contrast between what a conversation is and what the debate model is. And I want to explore that specifically because in my own experience, what happens in organizations where we are active every day is actually a pattern of a conversation that happens over multiple events, multiple encounters, and of course, these days over multiple Zoom calls, Slack messages, emails, etc. But it's something that lives through time. And if we don't have that context of what is a conversation, why it matters, and why it's important to look at the conversations that are happening, then we can't act on it. We're still subjects being influenced by it, if nothing else, reacting to it, but we don't know what it is. So help us out understand what this conversation and debate model are and how they are contrasting.
So the way I talk about it is people have conversations. So conversation is the umbrella heading. And because of the way that we have prized, put a high prize on things like academia and science and theology and the law, we've erred towards the debate model of conversation. And the debate model of conversation is about one argument prevailing over all others. And, while that may be a good thing in controlled conditions in a science laboratory or, trying to take apart a theory or whatever, or on the sports field, it's a terrible idea for when we want to meet as humans and have a conversation, because that's part of the imprint of a domination culture society, is it uses the debate model of conversation, where when you're talking, all I'm thinking about is how I'm going to respond to either overpower you or to protect myself from fear, humiliation, guilt and shame. So I realise that this other way of having a conversation is called a dialogue, but I couldn't find how to have a dialogue, and then how to have a dialogue when you've been totally indoctrinated in debate. Now, debate gets even worse because what we were subjected to at school was the most toxic form of debate, which is debate plus enforcement. So debate plus enforcement creates so many wounds in us, and we don't have places to even understand that we're being wounded, or places to heal from those wounds. And so what we do is we just keep replicating it. So most of what's going on is debate plus enforcement, and I think I heard Bob say, there was something that really spoke to me when you said you want people to have a better life at work or a better life anyway. And, I believe as humans, we can do better. And for many people, this information just hasn't been shared with them. So we come into the world and we go through this debate plus enforcement model, and we're literally programmed to believe it's the only way. And what I'm saying is there is actually a whole nother paradigm where we can be human together first. So I mean, obviously the dialogue roadmap has a set of tools, but it is about states of being. It's not about, I'm using words to demonstrate that I'm in a state of receiving so I can listen to you. I'm using words to demonstrate that I am in the state of empathy. I am using words to demonstrate that I want to give you a gift in the form of some feedback. So it's all about giving, receiving, dancing together, and building relationship before taking actions. And one of the most wonderful things is connection before correction. Connection before correction. So, and part of, what I heard you say is that, we react to things. You say something and I fire something off. You see, because I believe that as a result of continuous and imposed domination culture, I believe we're actually all living in shock. I think that we have not had enough time to process, and we're doing things too quickly. So we've become masters of taking care of the business end of things, getting the job done, multitasking, running multiple projects, goals, deadlines, and all. We're masters of that, speeding things up with technology. But what we haven't paid attention to is that our emotions cannot keep up with that. And so we're all backed up. We are all constipated. And there aren't the place. And what I do is, a lot of my work is just slowing things down. I heard someone say the other day, oh, but you don't understand, I go at 100 miles an hour. And my response was, think about everything that you miss in the scenery that you would see if you were going at 20 miles an hour.
Or even walking.
Or walking. But yeah.
Bob, what's your thoughts? What are your thoughts on this question of organizing our work around conversations versus debate?
While Maria was just talking, I was thinking, it's about needs getting ignored in most organizations. It's not that we have shared needs and we debate about the strategies for getting those needs met, or even it would be nice to have humane conversations about the various strategies for getting those needs met. But in most, let's not be too general, in many organizations, needs fall by the wayside. They're not even considered, let alone brought up and discussed openly. In some organizations, and in some cultures around the world, I guess America's a typical example. It's shaming to even suggest that you have needs or that people have needs. So part of what I do is invite participants to maybe for the first time think that, and when I talk to senior managers and executives, to have them think perhaps for the first time that their employees have needs, and is there some value to themselves and to their business in recognizing those needs and doing something about them?
That's a great question for us to end on. Before we go, though, I do want to ask both of you, what's one resource that you can recommend for people that want to understand NVC and the dialogue roadmap further? Maria, let's start with you.
Well, I mean, the book, Marshall's book, Nonviolent Communication, A Language for Life. I think it's sold multi-million copies in many languages, but that is, that's the go-to. That's the first go-to. And if people are interested, just come and talk to me. mariaarpa.com. Just come and talk to me.
Absolutely. We'll put the link to those two in the show notes. And you heard it, everybody. Reach out to Maria. How about Bob? Bob, what's one resource that you have for those of us listening, perhaps curious to explore these ideas further?
There's my blog, which has been going for like 15 years now. Almost every blog post, and there's something like 1,500 blog posts there now. Almost every blog post has a raft of citations of other blog posts or articles, or quite often books that relate to this subject amongst many others. Talking about Marshall Rosenberg's books, I find his book, The Surprising Purpose of Anger, very educative. A lot of people struggle with anger and frustration, particularly in the workplace, and don't really understand where that's coming from. Why?
And we end up thinking we need to express it in a way that others get to hear it, and we often forget to hear it ourselves.
Yeah. So, and finally, and mentioned on my blog in many cases, in many posts, is the books on organizational psychotherapy that I've written. So I've written 3 books on the subject. So if anybody is really at all interested in what organizational psychotherapy actually is, then there's a bunch of resources in the form of books that they can take a look at.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd just love to add one thing, if that's okay, because we've spoken a lot about NVC and how it helps and what it is and what the differences are. And one of the things that often happens when people hit resistance is they think they haven't got time for all of this. And one of the things that I really want to share is that when I introduce this work, and I'm pretty sure it will be the same for Bob, we get more done with less resource once we've been through the tunnel.
Yeah, it's like taking the rocks out of the river, to use a lean analogy.
Yeah, there we go.
Well, both of you, thank you very much for being here, sharing all that wisdom and stories and tips with us. It's been a pleasure. It's NVC and working with people is a core aspect of what we do in any organization, but of course, even more in organizations where people relating to each other is the essential interaction that is needed to create value. And of course, all knowledge work is like that. There are no machines working for us. We do need to get together and work together to reach common objectives. So thank you, Maria. Thank you, Bob, for being here and for being so generous with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
Hey, friend. Thank you for staying. Here is all you need to know about the Global Agile Summit. If you've ever suffered or know people who are suffering from agile fatigue, this event is for you. Agile fatigue is that feeling that settles in when we can't really see a light at the end of the tunnel. We get discouraged, especially when conversations revolve around the same old frameworks, the same old buzzwords and theories. We don't feel that energy anymore. Well, the Global Agile Summit is a different kind of event. We're bringing you real-life first-person stories of Agile succeeding out there in the real world that will inspire you to take action and transform the way you work. The Global Agile Summit will happen in Tallinn, Estonia, May 18th, that's the workshop day, and then 19th and 20th, the conference day. And Tallinn, Estonia is one of the most innovative tech hubs in Europe. The Global Agile Summit is hosted together with Latitude 59, which is kind of a citywide celebration of software startups and groundbreaking ideas. And we'll have a shared ticket for you to attend those events as well. So who will be speaking? Well, we've got an incredible lineup of thought leaders in software and Agile. For example, Clinton Keith, the person who literally wrote the book on game development with Scrum, and is busy bringing Agile to the world of game development. You must check his session. The very famous and well-known Jürgen Apelo, author of Management 3.0, will be talking and exploring about AI's impact on leadership. We also have Gojko Adzic, who's taking an unconventional look at the product growth with his lizard optimization keynote. Other speakers include, for example, Sven Dietz, who's challenging everything we know about software development by literally ditching contracts and estimates. Can you imagine? His teams deliver software before their competitors are even done with the contract negotiation. How agile is that? But there's more. We'll cover engineering practices in our developer track with talks on, for example, AI-assisted test-driven development, developing products in minutes with a different approach to how we develop, configure, deploy platforms, and much more. We also have a product track where we cover cutting-edge ideas around product discovery, delighting customers with product delight frameworks. We'll have a talk about that. And we also have an agile business track where we will talk about, for example, open strategy, a very agile approach to managing organizations and delivering software faster to clients, faster than you can even write a contract. Literally, I mean, I already told you about Sven Ditz's story. It's amazing. It definitely is a must-see. I'm sure you'll be inspired and get a lot of ideas for your own software projects and software delivery. Now, whether you're a business leader, a product innovator, or a developer, you'll definitely find value in our 3 focused tracks. That's Agile Business for those working with businesses and organizations, Agile Product for product managers, product owners, and innovators, and Agile Developer for the builders, making Agile work in practice, the coders, the testers, the designers, the producers, the Scrum Masters, you name it. If you join, you will meet over 200 Agile professionals from all over the world, people who, just like you, want to grow, want to share, and want to learn by challenging the ideas that don't work anymore. At the Global Agile Summit, you'll get new connections, fresh ideas, and the energy to take your own Agile to the next level. And who knows, maybe even find your next career opportunity. So don't miss out. Check out the full program and grab your ticket now at globalagilesummit.com. I'm really looking forward to seeing you all in Tallinn, Estonia in May. I'll see you there.